There are warnings in Scripture that appear strange until you look deeper. God often takes the ordinary bread, oil, stones, vessels, and attaches extraordinary spiritual meaning to them. The bed, for example, is not just furniture. It is the place of covenant, the place where the body is restored, the place where dreams are whispered into your spirit. Yet many of us treat this sacred space carelessly, as if nothing placed upon it matters. But listen carefully. What you put on your bed can shape the flow of your life. Yes, something as small as tossing the wrong object upon it can open doors you never intended to open. It can usher in restlessness, financial decline, and even sickness that no doctor can explain. Why? Because you've broken a principle of honor. You've contaminated the place designed for God to restore your strength. Tonight, I am here to sound an alarm. Never put this on your bed. It may seem trivial to you now, but it is a doorway the adversary is eager for you to ignore. What is at stake is not just sleep, but your health, your prosperity, and your destiny. The bed is far more than a piece of furniture in the home. It is a place with profound spiritual symbolism woven into its design and purpose. When God created man, He also designed rhythms of rest. The body was not meant to be in constant labor without reprieve, and the mind was not meant to race endlessly without quiet. The bed is the designated altar of that rest, the place where both body and soul retreat for renewal. To understand this, one must see that in Scripture, rest is always tied to blessing. The Sabbath itself was not simply a command, it was a gift of restoration and alignment with the Creator. In the same way, the bed functions daily as a miniature Sabbath. It is where the body surrenders and trust is renewed, because to close your eyes in sleep is, in itself, an act of faith. You believe that the world will not collapse while you are unconscious. You believe that God will keep you safe through the night. Thus, the bed symbolizes trust, restoration, and intimacy with God. Yet because of this symbolism, what is placed upon the bed matters greatly. To defile the bed with disorder or careless objects is to invite contamination into the very arena God intended to bless. Think of how covenant is made upon a bed, how new life is conceived there, how deep conversations of vulnerability take place between spouses there, and how dreams are received in the silence of night. This is not a casual piece of furniture, it is a spiritual gateway. To treat it carelessly is to diminish the sacredness of what happens there. When Jacob laid his head upon a stone at Bethel and dreamed of the ladder reaching into heaven, the place of his rest became the meeting point with God. If such holy encounters can occur in the context of rest, then what is laid upon the bed either prepares the atmosphere for blessing or pollutes it with disorder. Consider also that in many ancient cultures, the bed was seen as symbolic of authority and inheritance. Kings would pronounce blessings upon their children from the edge of their bed. Prophets would stretch themselves out upon beds when praying over the dead to raise them to life. These moments show that the bed was not merely functional, but deeply tied to spiritual influence. That symbolism has not vanished. It remains, and with it comes the responsibility to treat the bed with honor. When you casually throw unclean garments, trash, or even symbols of idolatry onto your bed, you are mixing the sacred with the profane. What is meant for restoration is now being invaded by contamination. The principle here is clear. The bed symbolizes covenant, restoration, and intimacy with God. It is a spiritual altar disguised as common furniture. To dishonor it is to dishonor the rhythms God established for health and blessing. Therefore, we must guard it carefully, never treating it lightly, because its symbolism carries weight far greater than the eye can see. The danger of carelessness often lies in how subtle it is. Most people do not deliberately invite chaos or spiritual corruption into their lives. They simply grow inattentive to the details that seem too small to matter. A bed becomes a convenient place to drop clothes, bags, and books without a second thought. But it is precisely in these small, careless acts that doors can be opened to poverty and sickness. The enemy rarely requires a grand invitation. He needs only the smallest crack to slip through. What may appear harmless in the natural can carry unseen spiritual consequences in the realm of the unseen. Carelessness toward the bed reflects a larger attitude toward life. If one disregards the sacredness of the place meant for rest, it often mirrors a deeper disregard for other areas of stewardship. Poverty rarely enters with a sudden collapse. It creeps in through neglect. The same is true for sickness. The body becomes vulnerable when order and discipline are abandoned. What starts as carelessness in one area can bleed into finances, relationships, and health. The bed, as a sacred place, becomes a testing ground of whether one treats God's gifts with honor or contempt. In Scripture, there are countless warnings about treating holy things lightly. Uzzah, who touched the Ark of the Covenant with what appeared to be good intentions, was struck dead because he disregarded the weight of its holiness. The lesson is sobering. Good motives do not excuse careless actions. When you toss unclean things onto the bed, or when you allow it to become a dumping ground for disorder, you are enacting a parable of Uzzah. You are placing your hand on something set apart for God's design without reverence. You may not die physically, but you will begin to see symptoms of unrest, lack, and weakness manifest in your life. Carelessness also blinds us to spiritual symbolism. What you do repeatedly becomes a ritual, whether you recognize it or not. If you habitually treat your bed as a storage shelf, you are building an unconscious ritual of dishonor. Every night you climb into that bed, you are stepping into an atmosphere that you yourself have polluted. This dishonor will echo into your sleep, robbing you of peace, clarity, and vitality. Dreams that should bring revelation may become clouded with confusion. Rest that should rejuvenate may instead leave you drained. The bed is too important a space to allow carelessness to dictate how it is handled. Therefore, the call is to wake up to the weight of small actions. Carelessness is not harmless. It is a thief. It robs silently, little by little, until lack and sickness take root. The enemy thrives where discipline and honor are absent. If you guard the bed with intention, you are not just protecting a piece of furniture, you are preserving a sanctuary where God's blessing is meant to flow. To neglect it, even in small ways, is to invite consequences far greater than you anticipated. Disorder is never neutral. It is a signal, a language that communicates something about the state of the heart and mind. When disorder invades the bed, it is not simply a matter of convenience or preference. It is a reflection of a deeper reality. The bed was designed as a sanctuary of peace, but when it becomes cluttered, it ceases to function as intended. Clothes, bags, papers, and random objects tossed carelessly upon it transform what should be a place of rest into a place of confusion. This disorder does not remain confined to the physical space. It seeps into the atmosphere of the soul. A cluttered bed becomes a mirror of a cluttered spirit. The problem is that disorder attracts more disorder. Poverty rarely begins with an empty wallet. It begins with a lifestyle that tolerates disarray. Sickness does not always begin with a virus. It can be born in the environment one chooses to dwell in. When the bed is treated as a dumping ground, it creates a breeding place for restlessness and weakness. The body cannot restore itself properly in an atmosphere where confusion reigns. The subconscious absorbs the message of disorder, and sleep, which should be healing, becomes shallow and fragmented. This weakened state makes one more vulnerable to both spiritual oppression and physical decline. Scripture consistently links order with blessing. In creation, God brought order out of chaos before he declared it good. In the tabernacle, every detail was meticulously arranged because order reflects his nature. Disorder, on the other hand, always opens a door to the adversary, whose strategy is rooted in confusion and chaos. If the enemy cannot destroy outright, he will disrupt, and the place of rest is one of his favorite targets. He knows that if your rest is compromised, your clarity is compromised. If your clarity is compromised, your decisions falter. Soon, poverty and sickness become natural outcomes of disordered living. The danger of disorder on the bed is not only physical, but symbolic. The bed represents covenant, intimacy, and restoration. To heap it with clutter is to trample those meanings underfoot. Imagine inviting a guest of honor into your home and leading them to a room filled with garbage and mess. That is how dishonor looks when we clutter the bed where God has ordained blessing. We may not think of it that way, but the spiritual realm takes note. What is tolerated in the physical becomes an invitation in the spiritual. Disorder is a declaration. I do not value what has been entrusted to me. Heaven responds to honor, and hell responds to neglect. This is why maintaining order is more than cleanliness. It is spiritual warfare. By keeping the bed pure and uncluttered, you are aligning with the principles of heaven. You are declaring that rest, intimacy, and restoration are sacred. You are closing the door to poverty and sickness, which thrive in the soil of disorder. What begins with something as simple as keeping your bed free from clutter becomes a powerful act of stewardship that protects your life from forces eager to devour it. What you honor prospers, and what you dishonor withers. This principle runs like a golden thread throughout Scripture and through the fabric of life itself. The bed is no exception. To treat the bed casually is to overlook its significance as a vessel of God's provision. Honor is not only shown in words, but in how we handle the tangible things entrusted to us. When we respect our place of rest, we are acknowledging the one who designed rest as a gift. When we dishonor it by carelessness, clutter, or unclean practices, we are indirectly dishonoring the God who provides restoration. Think of how the Bible portrays honor. The command to honor father and mother is linked to long life. To honor the Lord with the first fruits is tied to overflowing provision. In both cases, the act of honor unlocks blessing because it aligns the heart with God's order. The same principle applies to the bed. It is the stage upon which God renews strength each night. When it is honored, it becomes a channel of peace, healing, and clarity. When it is dishonored, the blessing is hindered and rest becomes restless. Poverty and sickness often creep in, not because God withholds, but because dishonor blocks the flow of His provision. Honor is spiritual currency. Where it is invested, it multiplies. Where it is absent, decay sets in. Consider how Jesus was dishonored in His own hometown. The Scripture says He could do few miracles there because of their unbelief. It was not that His power had diminished, but the atmosphere of dishonor closed the door to blessing. In the same way, dishonor toward the place of rest does not mean God cannot bless. It means you have closed the door through neglect and irreverence. Your bed, rather than being a conduit of renewal, becomes a place where unrest, financial strain, and sickness are silently nurtured. The act of honoring the bed can be simple yet profound. Keeping it clean, free from clutter, and reserved for rest is a declaration that you value what God values. You are saying that restoration is worth protecting, that the sacred rhythms of rest will not be treated as ordinary. This posture of honor creates an atmosphere where peace can flourish. It allows your spirit to remain open to divine impressions in the night hours and prepares your body to be strengthened for the tasks ahead. Dishonor, on the other hand, always costs more than it appears. To toss unclean objects onto the bed may seem like nothing, but it carries a spiritual echo. This place does not matter. Over time, that posture of dishonor spreads. It seeps into finances, relationships, and health. What is dishonored cannot prosper. What is honored multiplies. The choice is clear. If you want your life to reflect abundance, health, and clarity, begin by showing honor in the smallest of places. Start with the bed, the altar of restoration, and it will ripple into every other area of life. Poverty does not usually arrive with the sound of breaking glass or the drama of sudden collapse. More often, it slips in quietly, hidden in small habits of neglect. The same is true of sickness, which often grows out of environments that are not properly cared for. The bed, as the place of rest and renewal, becomes a mirror that reflects how a person treats the blessings God has entrusted. When the bed is used carelessly, piled high with clutter, unwashed clothes, or even food, it becomes a stage for neglect, and neglect is always the seedbed of lack. What begins as a simple disregard for order can grow into a lifestyle that subtly attracts poverty. Consider how Scripture describes the sluggard. Proverbs speaks of the field of the lazy man, overgrown with thorns and broken walls. That field did not reach such a state overnight. It became that way through small, repeated acts of neglect. In the same way, when the bed is dishonored, it communicates that the gift of rest is not valued. The subconscious absorbs this posture, and over time, it influences how one manages money, work, and health. A person who is careless with the bed often becomes careless in other areas. Poverty thrives in that atmosphere because what is neglected cannot multiply. Sickness also takes advantage of neglect. A bed that is never cleaned, sheets that are rarely washed, or clutter that attracts dust and germs create an environment that undermines physical health. The body cannot be fully restored in a place that is physically unclean and spiritually dishonored. But beyond the physical, there is a deeper principle at work. Neglecting the bed dishonors the rhythm God created for restoration, and dishonor always has consequences. Where honor brings blessing, dishonor brings weakness. Over time, that weakness manifests as sickness, whether in the body, the mind, or the spirit. This is why the bed becomes a prophetic picture of stewardship. The way you treat it reveals how you treat every other area of life. A clean, honored bed represents respect for God's order, while a neglected one reflects indifference to His provision. The enemy exploits neglect because he knows that what is left unattended eventually deteriorates. Poverty and sickness rarely require direct attack. They simply need a life where order and discipline have been abandoned. But there is also hope. Just as neglect attracts lack, stewardship attracts abundance. When you treat the bed with honor, keeping it clean, uncluttered, and reserved for rest, you are sowing seeds of diligence that will bear fruit in every area of life. The same principle that causes poverty to grow through neglect causes prosperity to grow through faithfulness. God multiplies what is cared for. He strengthens what is stewarded well. By guarding the bed and refusing to let neglect take root, you align yourself with a principle of blessing that can drive out both poverty and sickness. Stewardship is the thread that ties every blessing of God to our responsibility. Nothing He gives is without expectation, and nothing He entrusts is meant to be wasted. From the very beginning, when Adam was placed in the garden, the mandate was clear: to tend and keep it. That principle has never changed. Stewardship determines whether blessings multiply or diminish, whether health flourishes or declines, whether prosperity increases or is squandered. The bed, though it may seem small and ordinary, is part of this stewardship. It is entrusted as a sanctuary of rest, and how it is treated reveals the heart of the steward. Guarding the bed is not about legalism or superstition. It is about recognizing that what is neglected in the physical realm often reflects deeper spiritual negligence. If one cannot be faithful in keeping the place of rest in order, how can one be trusted with greater responsibilities? Jesus Himself taught that whoever is faithful in little will be faithful in much. The bed, therefore, becomes a test of character. To steward it well is to declare readiness for greater blessings. To disregard it is to signal unpreparedness for increase. Poverty and sickness thrive where stewardship fails. A neglected bed invites disorder, dishonor, and decay. The atmosphere of neglect spills into finances, relationships, and health. The enemy does not need to attack directly when he sees a life left unguarded. Stewardship closes the door to such attacks because it signals discipline, honor, and faithfulness. These qualities create an environment where God's blessings can dwell securely. Think of Joseph in Egypt. He was entrusted with stewardship in Potiphar's house, in prison, and finally in Pharaoh's palace. In every place, his faithfulness to manage what was given to him opened the door to greater promotion. The same principle applies in the smaller, hidden places of life. Stewardship of the bed may never be seen by others, but it is observed in the spiritual realm. It is a statement of how one values rest, order, and the blessings God provides. To guard it carefully is to align with the principle that God multiplies what is handled with care. Stewardship also protects the sacredness of the covenant space. The bed is where restoration happens, where intimacy is shared, where revelation can be received. To steward it poorly is to treat lightly what God treats as holy. But when it is guarded, kept clean, and reserved for its true purpose, it becomes an altar of blessing, drawing health and prosperity rather than poverty and sickness. In the end, stewardship is never about the bed alone. It is about a posture of the heart that says, I will value what God has entrusted to me, no matter how small. I will guard it, honor it, and protect it as a reflection of His goodness. That kind of stewardship draws heaven's attention and unleashes abundance that no force of poverty or sickness can withstand.